I arrived at my son's place filled with hope, thinking maybe, just maybe, I'd find a sliver of warmth that had long been missing. It had been 2 full years since my husband passed away that winter, and the silence in my house had grown so thick I could hear the tick of the old wall clock like a metronome in an empty hall. The living room always felt like a theater after curtain call, quiet, abandoned, stripped of life. Most days I'd just sit at the kitchen table staring into nothing, the ticking clock counting each lonely second. "Mom, we really worry about you living alone," Jude said over the phone. His voice was warm, sincere. "Why don't you just move in with us? It'll be livelier and you could help us out with Elliot too." My heart stirred. Seeing my son every day, spending time with my grandson, it all sounded like a remedy for the ache that had settled into my chest. I packed a few changes of clothes, locked up my house, and tucked away something I hadn't touched in years, the deed to my home hidden carefully in the back of my dresser. Then I stepped into their world. Their apartment was on the Upper West Side, in one of those tree-lined neighborhoods with doormen and parks that always smelled like new money. The moment I stepped through the door, I was nearly blinded by the interior. Crystal chandeliers, a butter-soft leather couch, and abstract paintings on the wall that looked expensive, if not entirely comprehensible. The marble tiles underfoot were polished to a mirror sheen. No doubt they'd spared no expense. Lydia, mid-face mask, greeted me with an overly bright smile. She moved gingerly as if worried the sheet mask might peel off with too much motion. "Chloe, you're finally here, come on in. Is it hot outside?" she chirped. She reached for my rolling suitcase, which wasn't heavy at all, but pulled her hand back almost instantly as though she'd touched something sticky. Then, recovering quickly, she produced a new pair of house slippers. "Jude's still on his way. I ordered all your favorites for dinner, they'll be here soon." As she talked, her eyes gave me a quick scan, from my graying hair to the worn cloth shoes on my feet and finally to the scuffed suitcase beside me. Her smile faltered for half a second. I felt it, just a flicker of something. But I smiled back and said gently, "Thank you, Lydia. That's very thoughtful of you." Jude got home in time for dinner and he seemed genuinely happy to see me. He buzzed around the dining table like a host at a holiday party. The meal was elaborate, filled with dishes that clearly took time and effort. Across from me, Lydia sat feeding Elliot bits of food, then said casually, "You know, everything's so expensive these days. Last time I went to the store I spent over $1,000. Elliot's tuition's outrageous and we've got the mortgage breathing down our necks. The pressure is just a lot." She sighed and cast a quick sidelong glance at me. Jude jumped in. "Hey, it's dinner time. Let's not bring up all that. Mom just got here. Don't scare her off." Lydia shrugged and said nothing more. But that little phrase, "the pressure is just a lot," hung in the air like a thread of smoke. It pricked at me, subtle but sharp. At the time I brushed it off. Young people complain. Who doesn't have stress these days? But looking back, I see it now for what it was: groundwork. A quiet rehearsal for what she really wanted to say. I thought I was stepping into a warm family reunion, a heartfelt little drama about grandmothers and grandsons. But it took all of one night for the story to twist into something else entirely. A question of who's footing the bill. The next morning I woke early as I always do. Age has a way of making sleep shallow. I thought I'd surprise them with a hot breakfast. Tiptoeing into the kitchen I found Lydia already up. She was perched at the dining table in a silk robe, one leg crossed over the other, lazily brushing polish onto her fingernails while a drama played quietly on her phone. The table was littered with greasy fast food bags from the night before, wrappers slick with oil. As I stepped into the room, she barely lifted her head, just a glance upward, more reflex than welcome. "Oh, Chloe, you're up?" she said flatly, like she was checking off a to-do list. "I ordered breakfast. Should be here soon. No need for you to fuss." I turned and quietly took a seat at the dining table. The silence in the room felt heavy, almost awkward. The scent of fresh coffee mixed with the greasy aroma of fried food, as if the very air was reminding me, I didn't quite belong here. The delivery arrived. Donuts, egg sandwiches, and lattes in cardboard cups. Jude grabbed a few bites, slung his briefcase over his shoulder, and waved as he headed out the door. "See you at dinner, Mom." The front door slammed shut behind him, leaving just me, Lydia, and little Elliot, who was playing quietly on the rug. Lydia set down her fork, dabbed her lips with a napkin, and finally looked at me with a smile that felt a little too polished. like a realtor easing into a sales pitch. "Chloe," she began, casual as can be, "now that you're part of the household, things are a bit more crowded. Expenses go up with more people around. Elliot's school costs a fortune, and with both of us working, everything just adds up." She paused as if carefully choosing her words, then smiled a little more warmly, but still with that professional distance, like she was discussing business over brunch. "So I was thinking maybe if you could chip in, say $3,000 a month? It's not a huge amount, just something to keep things fair. That way everything's clear from the start and we don't have awkward misunderstandings down the road. What do you think?" She said it as breezily as if she were announcing a power outage in the building tomorrow. My hand trembled, nearly spilling the hot coffee in my lap. Complete, unfiltered shock. And then, a chill that started at the crown of my head and crept all the way down my spine. It wasn't the money that stunned me. I could afford it. My retirement income, paired with the modest savings my late husband had left, was more than enough to support me on my own. No, what I couldn't stomach was the look on her face as she said it. Cool, calculated, not the slightest trace of hesitation or embarrassment. As if she were ringing up a bill. Just yesterday she'd been all smiles and warmth. And now she was handing me an invoice for my place at the table. I stared at her, searching her perfectly composed face for any sign that this was some offhand joke, or that maybe, just maybe, she felt the tiniest bit ashamed. But there was nothing. Only calm. A quiet, entitled kind of calm. To her I wasn't family. I was an added expense. A line item in their household budget. I had come from Pittsburgh thinking I'd stay for a while, maybe share some laughter and help out with Elliot. But apparently I was just another tenant. One expected to pay rent. In that moment it felt like my heart had dropped straight into a freezer. I didn't respond right away. I just sat there, my mind splitting into two voices. One said, "Let it go, Chloe. You're not getting any younger. Jude's your only son. If this keeps the peace, if it makes things easier for him, then fine. Give them the money. Help them out like you always have." But the other voice was sharper, louder. "You've given enough. You raised him alone. You paid for his home, gave him a head start in life. Now you want nothing more than to be close to your family, and you're being asked to pay an entry fee? This isn't about money, it's about respect. Today it's $3,000. What's it going to be next month?" Exactly. This wasn't about dollars. It was about dignity. From the beginning, Lydia never once saw me as part of this family. She saw me as an intruder, a temporary guest who'd better pay her dues, follow the rules, and eventually leave on schedule. Every word she said, every glance she gave me, it all served as a quiet reminder. You're not one of us. You're just a tolerated outsider. My mind, almost involuntarily, drifted back to a few years ago. It was when Jude and Lydia had just gotten engaged. They were both fresh out of school, just starting out, strapped for cash. Buy a house. Forget about paying in full. They couldn't even come up with the down payment. Jude was so anxious about it he could barely sleep. I remember his late-night phone calls, his voice lined with stress and helplessness. My husband, still alive at the time, and I sat at the kitchen table that night, poring over our finances long after midnight. By morning we'd made the decision. We emptied most of our savings and even tapped into part of his retirement investments. We scraped together every last cent we could and came up with the full price of this apartment. Because we paid for it entirely, the property deed, naturally, was in my name. We never told them the full truth. All we said was that we covered the down payment, and that the rest was a mortgage they'd be paying off themselves. And so every month they dutifully transferred money to me for the so-called loan, which I never used. I simply deposited it into a separate account, saving it for when they might really need it, or for when my husband and I were too old to care for ourselves. Only the two of us ever knew. Jude and Lydia have gone on believing they were slowly chipping away at a mortgage. That this home belonged to them. I let out a slow, bitter laugh. "Lydia, you think I'm just a guest here? You don't even realize I paid for this place. In full." I couldn't stay silent any longer. I've always believed that the foundation of a good home is mutual respect. But if you've decided to treat me like a stranger, then don't be surprised when I stop pretending this is a family matter, and start treating it like business. I took a deep breath. The chill that had settled in my chest began to melt, replaced by a strange calm, almost unnaturally steady, sharpened by resolve. I looked up and met Lydia's gaze. She was still watching me, waiting for me to fold. Her smile was polite, fixed in place, but her eyes sparkled with anticipation. She thought she'd won. Kept my voice smooth. 3,000? Sure. That's doable. She clearly hadn't expected me to agree so easily. Her eyes lit up, and her lips curled upward like she'd just snagged a designer handbag for half off during a holiday sale. She must have thought I was afraid. Afraid of aging alone, afraid of not having a roof over my head. I didn't bother calling out her little fantasy. I just stood up slowly, turned around and walked back to my room. It was the smaller bedroom in the apartment, modestly furnished, just a bed and an old wardrobe. My suitcase still leaned in the corner, barely unpacked except for a few changes of clothes. I knelt down and pulled it out. The leather was scuffed, the old travel tags still dangling from the handle. I reached into the side pocket and pulled out a tiny key. The lock gave a slight creak as it opened with a soft click. Inside weren't valuables, just fragments of a life lived quietly. A photo of my husband in his youth, a few letters I'd written to myself but never sent, some faded clothes that hadn't seen daylight in years. They lay there untouched, as if they too had never been truly welcomed in this house. At the very bottom was a red velvet pouch. My fingers brushed over the soft fabric as I pulled it out gently. I loosened the drawstring and there it was, a thick burgundy folder. The deed. My name, Chloe Collins, written in firm, deliberate strokes across the front page. I held it in my hands for a moment, feeling its weight. Then I walked out of the room and headed back toward the dining area. Lydia was still sitting there, her face frozen in a satisfied smirk, like a manager who had just closed the deal of the day and was waiting for the paperwork to come through. I walked to the dining table but didn't sit down. Instead, I placed the thick red folder, the property deed, right in the center with a sharp thud. Lydia's smile froze in place the moment she saw it. But before we talk about a monthly contribution, I said, my tone calm, eerily calm, really, maybe we should start by discussing rent. I tapped the folder with one finger and continued, my voice slow and unwavering. This apartment? I paid for it. The name on the deed, Chloe Collins, is mine. I paused, watching the color slowly drain from her face. Then I added, you and Jude moved in what, 3-4 years ago? You probably know what rent goes for in this neighborhood. Let's calculate back rent first. Then we can talk about who owes what in living expenses. Living expenses? Sure. Let's do it by the book. You live in my home, I eat your donuts. We'll settle the tabs one item at a time. It was like all the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. Lydia's smug expression melted like watercolor on wet paper. Her eyes went wide, locked on the folder like it was a court summons with her name on it. She snatched it up with reflexive panic and flipped it open, scanning the pages with trembling fingers. When she reached the first page and saw my name, Chloe Collins, in unmistakable bold lettering, along with my full social security number, her entire face short-circuited. Pale disbelief gave way to flushed outrage, which then collapsed into something closer to panic. She looked up, eyes boring into me as if she were seeing a stranger. The woman she thought was soft, malleable, maybe even desperate, was now the legal owner of the very roof over her head. The dining room seemed to freeze over. Outside, a car horn sounded faintly down the block. The ticking of the wall clock cut through the silence like a hammer tapping at her nerves. I didn't say a word. I just picked up the bowl of oatmeal that had long gone cold, stirred it gently with a spoon and brought a bite to my mouth. I'll admit it, seeing her look like she'd just swallowed a live fly gave me a fleeting sense of satisfaction. Even if it only lasted a moment. But I also knew this was just the beginning. The real confrontation hadn't even started yet. Lydia's lips parted as if to speak but nothing came out. Her jaw worked, her mouth twitching like it wanted to form words. But reason or maybe pride held her back. She bit her lip, swallowing down whatever bitterness threatened to rise. Then with a sudden burst of movement she flung the deed back onto the table. The slap of it against the wood cracked through the stillness of the room, startling even little Elliot, who dropped his toy and looked up, confused and wide-eyed. Lydia shoved her chair back so hard it screeched across the tile. Without a word she glared at me, teeth clenched, then turned and stormed into the bedroom, slamming the door behind her like a thrown gauntlet. I didn't move. The deed still lay there on the table, blazing red against the polished wood like an open wound. And I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that from this moment on the lines were drawn. Ever since I laid that deed on the table, The air in this apartment had changed. Like a thin shell of ice had formed around the entire household. Lydia went cold. Not a word, not a glance. If we crossed paths in the hallway, she'd pass by me like I was invisible, like I didn't even exist. The kitchen had become little more than a prop. Lydia stopped cooking altogether, either ordering takeout or whisking Elliot off to her mother's for dinner. She never said a word on her way out. Not a "we're heading out," not a glance back. It was as if I'd ceased to exist, as if I were no longer part of this home, just some inconvenient variable they had no choice but to endure. Even the living room felt different now. It used to echo with Elliot's sing-alongs or the chatter from Lydia's soap operas, full of noise and life. Now it was mostly silence. Just me and Elliot sitting on the carpet fitting puzzle pieces together. Click, clack, tiny scattered sounds that mirrored the family itself. Fractured, barely holding. Jude had it the worst, caught squarely in the middle. He'd walk in after work, and before he even had his coat off, his face said it all. Tense, exhausted, lost. I could tell Lydia had filled him in, probably with her own dramatic flair. But Jude never confronted me about it. Instead, he'd wait for her to be in the shower or step out to take a call, and then creep into the kitchen like he was sneaking around his own house. "Mom," he'd begin in a low, sheepish voice. Lydia can be a little sharp sometimes. She doesn't mean anything by it. It's just her way. You know, she speaks without thinking. I looked at him, my son, the man trying so hard to keep peace but pleasing no one, and my heart swelled with a mix of anger and sorrow. I cut him off gently but with weight in every syllable. "Jude, I know this is hard for you. But this isn't about money. It's about respect." I held his gaze and said firmly, "Your father and I saved for decades to buy this place. I'm sorry I never told you the deed was in my name. I always planned to transfer it to you one day. But your wife's attitude, it's made me question everything. What does she see me as? A burden? Someone who has to pay to stay? An outsider who needs to buy her seat at the table?" I paused, then let my tone drop lower, colder. "I'm not asking for rent. I'm letting that go. But as for living expenses, don't ever bring it up again. I'm not unwilling to contribute. But not when it's delivered like an invoice. Not when there's no basic decency behind the ask. If I'm not even shown respect, what am I staying here for?" Jude opened his mouth, then closed it again. Finally, he lowered his head and muttered, "I understand, Mom. I'll talk to her." I watched him and silently sighed. I thought my words might make Lydia back off. Instead, she just got more creative. She stopped asking for money outright and started a silent war. Her own private campaign of petty sabotage. A cold war of domestic inconveniences. I went to the bathroom after she used it. Wet tiles everywhere. The floor was slick like it had been greased. I nearly took a fall that could have landed me in the... I tossed a few of my clothes into the washing machine. When I turned back around, it was stuffed to the brim. She'd picked the longest setting, 2 hours of deep sanitation. I'd be watching TV in the living room when she'd suddenly walk by, grab the remote, blast the volume until it rattled the windows, then disappear into her bedroom and slam the door shut behind her. It was petty. Cruel in its smallness. I burned with frustration, but I didn't show it. Slippery bathroom. I waited for it to dry or grabbed a mop and cleaned it myself. Washing machine hijacked. I took my big loads to the dry cleaner. Washed the rest by hand. TV too loud. I turned it off, went back to my room, pulled out a book, or popped in my earbuds and listened to a podcast. She wanted me angry. Wanted me to snap, to feel so unwelcome I'd pack up and go on my own. But me. I'm made of sturdier stuff. I spent my younger years doing graveyard shifts at the hospital. I've worked with nurses short on sleep, patients short on patients, and systems that broke down every other day. You think your passive-aggressive antics are going to break me? Lydia, honey, you picked the wrong woman. Fight fire with fire. That's always been my way. I wasn't about to let Lydia drag the whole house into chaos. At least not openly. For Jude's sake, I tried to keep the peace. I figured if I didn't rise to her petty provocations, things might settle down. But the more I held my tongue, the more Lydia mistook my silence for weakness. Her little stunts continued. Small, cutting inconveniences that made the house feel colder by the day. And when I still didn't lash out, she started to get restless. Antsy even. Then one night, I got up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. As I passed their bedroom, I noticed the door was ajar. Just a crack, but enough. The light inside was dim, but I heard her voice, low and sharp, cutting through the quiet like a blade. She's doing it on purpose. Acting all high and mighty. Waving that deed around like it makes her queen of the damn house. She thinks she can control us with that. She's delusional. Jude, I'm warning you, if you keep defending her, I swear I can't live like this. Then came Jude's voice, barely above a whisper and heavy with exhaustion. Keep your voice down. Mom's next door. Lydia let out a bitter little laugh. So what if she hears me? Good. Let her. If she had an ounce of self-awareness, she'd have packed up and gone back to that dusty little apartment in Pittsburgh by now. I stood there, rooted in place as the cold crept up from my bare feet and wrapped around the back of my neck. But I didn't flinch. I've seen worse. Lydia, I thought you're not ready for this kind of game. Back in my day, hospitals were battlegrounds. Cutthroat promotions, backroom whispers, politics thick as fog. I've been through real warfare, dealt with sharper knives behind smiles. If someone like you had tried this with one of my old charge nurses, you'd have been pouring coffee before your second sentence. But to pull this on your mother-in-law? That's just rookie arrogance. When the silent war didn't work, Lydia brought in backup. That weekend she invited her mother over, Juliana Peterson. The refined mother-in-law, the kind who probably practiced smiles in the mirror. The excuse was a casual visit, just dropping by, it's been too long, but the look on Lydia's face said otherwise. This was strategy. A subtle tag team effort. And Juliana, judging by her entrance, came prepared. She was a few years younger than me and well-maintained, outfit crisp, makeup pristine, perfume tasteful and expensive. Her whole presence was coordinated like a magazine spread. The moment she stepped in, she grabbed my hands in a varnished grip that felt like a three-layered shellac job, shiny, smooth and slippery. Chloe, I've been dying to meet you. I heard you'd moved in and I told Lydia, how have I not stopped by yet? Honestly, it's been weighing on me. I smiled politely, said nothing. She led me to the couch, perched beside me with a sparkle in her eye. You look fantastic, not a day over 60. What's your skincare routine? You have to tell me your secret. All sugar and gloss. Until the shift came, subtle like a change in wind direction. But Chloe, she said, patting the back of my hand with a practiced gentleness, as elders, sometimes we have to make a little room in our hearts for what the younger generation is going through. Times are hard, you know that. Kids these days are juggling so much. Raising little ones, paying off mortgages, juggling careers. Jude and Lydia, they're under a lot of pressure. I nodded faintly. Still said nothing. She continued, undeterred. Gently circling the real reason she was here. I heard, just to mention in passing, that you brought out the deed the other day? Her tone was casual, but her eyes didn't blink. Honestly, I just think, in a family things shouldn't get too formal. A deed sitting in your drawer, it's not really worth much on its own, right? But it creates this, weight. Kids can feel that, you know? Like the home's not really theirs. And then finally the ask, wrapped in soft velvet but hard as stone underneath. So I was thinking, maybe it's best to just transfer the deed now. Make things simpler. Give everyone peace of mind. That way the house feels like a true home for them, and we can all move forward as one happy family. Don't you agree? I couldn't help myself. My mouth curled into a small knowing smile. So this is the next phase. Same game, new messenger. Lydia asked for monthly payments. Juliana asked for the whole house. One came blunt, the other dressed in pearls and diplomacy. Same hunger. Just different forks. I kept the polite smile on my face, my tone gentle, but there was no mistaking the firmness underneath. Juliana, I understand what you're saying, I said, echoing her earlier words with measured grace. But as for transferring the deed, that's not something I'm considering at the moment. I paused, watching the faint flicker in her eyes. The way her smile tightened, her expression shifted, before continuing just as calmly. You mentioned the kids needing a sense of security, and I agree. But I believe that security in a family doesn't come from a deed. It comes from mutual respect and the peace of knowing you're treated with decency. Don't you think so? I passed the ball back, gently but decisively. Every carefully staged line she'd prepared was dismantled, piece by piece. Juliana's mask slipped the moment she realized I wasn't buying what she was selling. The warm, concerned mother-in-law smile disappeared like someone had pulled the plug. Seeing her mother hit a wall, Lydia immediately pounced, pouring gasoline onto the fire. Mom, don't waste your time. She's doing this on purpose. Holding that deed over our heads like she owns us. Acting like we're freeloaders just because we live in her house. She's playing the martyr. Like she's supporting us out of charity. Who does that to their own son? Juliana's face shifted with theatrical outrage, voice rising a full octave. Exactly. Chloe, this is just unkind. Jude is your son. And over one house you're putting them through this? If people hear about this, they'll think Lydia married into the family for the property, and Jude's just some mooch who lives off his mother. And just like that, the living room exploded. Jude stood between the three of us, pale as a sheet, sweat breaking across his forehead. He looked like a firefighter dropped into 3 simultaneous blazes, spinning in circles trying to put out flames with bare hands. Mom, can we please not, just for once? Lydia, calm down, come on, let's just. Juliana, please, no one's attacking anyone. He went around and around trying to soothe everyone with words as light as air, words that couldn't touch the fire, let alone put it out. And as the shouting escalated, I could see it. Jude was starting to fold. There was a shift in his eyes when he looked at me. A softening, yes, but not the right kind. It was that pleading look of a man who just wanted the noise to stop. The kind of look that said, can we just make this go away? Later that night, when Lydia took Elliot for a bath, Jude slipped into my room like a shadow. His voice was barely audible, fraying at the edges. Mom, he rubbed his hands together, eyes flickering to the floor. I know you've been hurt. I do. But maybe we could just put the house stuff aside for now. He forced a hopeful smile, the kind that's more apology than joy. I just want peace, Mom. Lydia, she's not trying to hurt anyone. She wants this house to feel like home. That's all. And there was. The dull, familiar ache of disappointment settled into my chest. Not rage. Not even sadness. Just that slow, suffocating sense of collapse. The kind that doesn't break you, just hollows you out. Because I realized, it wasn't that he didn't understand. It was that he didn't have the spine to act on what he knew. He saw it all. The disrespect, the manipulation, the way his wife spoke to and about me. And still he chose to look the other way. To smooth it over. Even if it meant offering up his mother's dignity just to avoid another argument. I cut him off, my voice low, drained and final. Jude, let me say this one last time. I'm not using this house to control anyone. I looked him dead in the eye. This house was bought with the money your father and I scraped together over decades. It was always meant for you, for your future. Not so your wife could turn around and use it as a weapon against me. My voice stayed steady, but every word landed like stone. And if you really think it's no big deal that your wife demands money to my face and calls me a useless old hag behind my back, if you're willing to excuse all that, then I will leave. I dropped the words into the living room like a match and walked away. Back to my room. The door shut behind me with a quiet click, but inside I felt like something had been hollowed out completely. Jude was still standing in the living room, pale as paper, lips drained of color. Maybe he'd finally realized I meant it, that I really could walk away. But if my words shook him, they only emboldened Lydia. She must have decided I was bluffing. That I'd talk big for a few days, then cave like a tired old woman with nowhere else to go. After all, in her eyes, what else could a nearly 70-year-old widow do? No job, no backup plan, no second home. Without their house, where could I possibly go? The message she didn't say aloud but made perfectly clear was, you leave and you die. And from that moment she escalated. Every afternoon nap was interrupted by the TV blaring at full volume. Always some shrieking reality show with voices like nails on glass. Or she'd fire up the vacuum and run it back and forth outside my bedroom door like she was sanding the floorboards with a lawnmower. The sound didn't just disturb. It grated. Intentionally. And then Juliana, the mother-in-law turned houseguest, moved in. After her failed attempt at a friendly intervention, she decided to stay a while. Let's be honest, she wasn't here to visit. She was here to wage psychological warfare. A tag team effort with her daughter. They turned the whole house into their theater. Meals became performance art. They'd critique my cooking with the subtlety of food critics on a bad Yelp streak. Too bland, too salty, too old-fashioned. At the table, they'd hold rapid-fire conversations at a volume just above casual and just below shouting, laughing loudly, talking fast, making sure I couldn't follow a word, and wasn't invited to. They wanted to erase me without touching me. make me feel invisible through sheer force of exclusion. But I stayed quiet. Quieter than ever. When they talked, I closed my door. When they rolled their eyes, I finished my dinner. They threw weapons, I responded with silence. Because silence, when wielded correctly, can cut deeper than anything else. By now I'd stopped hoping Jude might step in. He'd made his choice. He stood on the side of marriage, even if it meant pushing his mother into the shadows. I was still contemplating my next move when life handed me an answer in the most bitter form imaginable. It was a hot, sleepy afternoon. The sun poured down like honey and I was on the balcony gently rocking in the chair, earbuds in, listening to a podcast. My eyes were closing. I was drifting. Then I heard it. A voice, sharp, familiar. The glass door to their master bedroom hadn't closed all the way, and our balconies were practically joined at the edge. Lydia was talking to Juliana in a hushed but unmistakably venomous tone. She thought no one could hear. "Don't worry, Mom. That old bat won't last much longer. He's just playing tough. Where's she gonna go? Jude's all she's got. She'll fold eventually." She waves that deed around like it means something. "Please. One day she'll croak and guess what? The house goes straight to Jude. It's as good as mine. Her pension barely covers groceries. You think she's buying herself another place at her age? Just wait. She'll come crawling back. And when she does, I'll be the one calling the shots." I sat straight up. The earbud fell from my ear. My palm turned clammy, the kind of cold that felt like gripping an iron railing in the middle of a snowstorm. She wasn't trying to make peace. She wasn't looking for compromise. She was waiting for me to die. She had already filed away my pension, my house, even my husband's savings as part of their future net worth. She was planning her life around my absence, counting down the days. Every word came light and casual like it was just logistics. But every syllable was a scalpel slicing straight to the bone. And in that moment I saw it clearly. Lydia never saw me as family. Not even once. I wasn't a mother-in-law. I wasn't a person. I was an obstacle, a human ATM, a temporary problem to outlive. It wasn't ignorance. It wasn't emotional immaturity. It was greed and cruelty. Calculated, chilling, total. She wasn't stupid. She was evil. Very well. Lydia, Juliana, and the heartbreakingly spineless Jude. If you've chosen cruelty, then don't be surprised when I stop playing nice. The moment I heard Lydia's words, that venom laced with greed and contempt, whatever thread of emotional attachment I had to this house, to this so-called family, snapped for good. Not heartbreak. Disgust. Total bone-deep disgust. In her world, family is just a transaction. If you're no longer useful, you're disposable. Once the benefit dries up, so should the relationship. That night I made a decision. I would endure no more. I didn't have to. The next morning was Saturday. Jude and Lydia were home. Naturally, Juliana was still there, clinging on like mildew. I woke early as usual. But this time I didn't hide in my room. I got dressed, clean clothes, sun hat, canvas shopping bag in hand, and walked out the door. I went to the farmer's market. Picked up fresh beef, some tender greens, ripe tomatoes. On the way back I stopped by my favorite bakery and bought 4 blueberry cream tarts. My little indulgence. Back home I headed straight into the kitchen. No unnecessary words. No commentary. Just the rhythm of a stove that hadn't seen this much action in days. By late afternoon, the house was filled with the aroma of home-cooked food. Lydia and her mother looked up from the couch, clearly surprised. They'd been living on takeout and reheated pizza for days. I hadn't so much as touched a spatula. Jude's face lit up, mistaking this for some kind of peace offering. He hurried into the kitchen to help carry dishes, practically beaming. "Mom, this smells amazing. Thank you for cooking," he said like a boy who thinks a Band-Aid can fix a broken leg. The table was quiet. Strangely quiet. The kind of quiet that hums with tension beneath the surface. Juliana chewed methodically, her eyes flicking to me every few seconds. Lydia kept her head down, but the rigid way she gripped her fork gave her away. She was waiting. Waiting for me to make a move. Jude tried to lighten the mood, rattling off some office anecdotes like a 5th grader trying to win Student of the Month. He even forced a few laughs. No one joined in. I sat across from them watching. The food was rich with flavor. But inside I felt nothing. Because I knew this was the last meal I would ever cook for this household. I looked at Jude, my son. Across from him sat two women whose faces were practically painted with greed. And if even now he could see the calculation behind their smiles, if he had any instinct to stand up to take a side, my side, then maybe, just maybe, I'd hesitate. But he didn't. He just kept his eyes low, chewing slowly, watching everyone like he was waiting for a mine to go off. Some people never understand the concept of boundaries until you draw them in stone. So I did. As dinner wrapped up, I quietly set down my silverware and dabbed my mouth with a napkin. The room hushed. The television buzzed somewhere in the background, distant and irrelevant. I sat up straighter. Looked each of them in the eye. Jude, Lydia, Juliana. Then I spoke. I've made my decision. On Monday, I'll be visiting my attorney to formally revoke your authorization to live in this home. My gaze settled on Jude. This property was purchased by me with my own funds. It was never gifted, never added to any marital asset pool. Lydia's face contorted. What are you talking about? What I'm talking about, I said with a calm, measured smile, is that you and your mother will need to move out. Juliana gasped. Chloe, have you lost your mind? You're kicking us out. What happened to family? Family, I echoed. My voice dropped to a quiet, terrifying chill. Was that before or after you vacuumed my door at midnight? Or maybe when you stood outside my room and talked about waiting for me to die? Jude's face drained of blood. Mom, please don't do this. Can we just talk? I turned to him, colder than I've ever been. Jude, I gave you so many chances to talk. I begged for understanding. I gave you my silence. I gave you peace. You chose them. And now you can deal with the consequences, right alongside them. I stood up, calm and collected, and pulled a neatly folded paper from my handbag. This is a preliminary notice, I said, holding the document in plain view. You have 3 days to remove any belongings from this house that do not belong to me. I won't call the police, but if you're still here after that, I'll have my attorney issue a formal eviction order. Lydia shot to her feet. You can't do that. Jude, say something. Jude didn't move. Not a word. He just stood there, hollowed out like someone had drained the last drop of strength from his body. I turned and walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water. My voice floated out in an even tone, unhurried, matter-of-fact. I'm not bluffing. I can sell this house, rent it, donate it to a homeless shelter for all I care. But I will not leave it to people who treat me with contempt. I turned, looked at them one last time. I can be a good mother, I said, voice steady as glass. Or I can be a landlord. That's your choice. Then I turned and walked back to my room. The door closed behind me with a sharp, decisive click. And that was when the house exploded. Lydia shrieked from the living room, slamming plates, pounding the table like a toddler mid-tantrum. You see how she treats us. She's trying to ruin us. She's throwing us out like garbage. Who the hell does she think she is? Juliana wasn't far behind, fanning the flames. Jude, are you blind? That house should have been yours. What right does she have to do this? And then finally, Jude snapped. Enough, he shouted, his voice cracking through the chaos like a whip. Can you both shut up for 5 minutes? Silence dropped like a curtain. He sank into a chair, buried his face in his hands, and when he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse. Defeated. This house was never mine. He paid for it. In full. My name's not on the deed. It never was. His hands dropped, revealing a face twisted in shame. What do you want me to do? Lydia froze. Juliana turned to stone. And inside my room I didn't feel a single thing. The performance was over. Time to bring down the set. That night I sat at my desk and gathered my documents. A copy of the property deed. The revocation of residency rights. My attorney's contact sheet. And a rental listing for nearby apartments. One I'd gotten from my friend Judy, who had been by my side since the beginning. I had a plan. The moment they left, I'd list this house for rent and finally remove myself from this toxic web. The next morning I dressed with precision, clean lines, dark blazer, hair tucked neatly beneath my hat. I picked up my leather document folder and stepped into the living room. Lydia and Juliana were slouched on the sofa, faces pale as if they hadn't slept all night. I stopped in front of them and said evenly, I'm heading to my attorney's office to submit the official paperwork. You have 3 days. Leave before the deadline and I won't press the issue. Stay and we'll handle this in court. Lydia looked up, her face drained of color. You're really doing this? I'm not kicking anyone out, I replied crisply. I'm clearing out unfinished business. This was never your home. It never has been. Juliana jumped up. How can you be so heartless? Jude is your son. Do you have no shame? I didn't even glance at her. I turned to Jude. If you were really my son, I said, eyes locked on his, you'd know this is the last time your mother will clean up your mess. Jude opened his mouth. Nothing came out. I let out a quiet, dry laugh. Relax. I'm not tossing you out onto the street. I held up the file. I've already spoken to the building manager. There are a few short-term rentals available within the week. You'll have a roof over your head. Don't say I didn't give you a soft landing. And with that I walked out. I went straight to Camille Harris's office in Lower Manhattan. She was exactly the kind of woman I wanted on my side. Early 40s, sharp as broken glass and stilettos. A no-nonsense attorney who specialized in family assets and high-conflict households. Judy had introduced us months ago, just in case. I sat across from her, unfolded my papers onto the desk and spoke without hesitation. I'm not asking them to pay me back. I just want them out. I looked her square in the eye. I want my space back. I want my life back. And I want this entire twisted parasitic relationship severed. Permanently. Camille flipped through the documents swiftly, then gave a short, confident nod. Your ownership is clear. The evidence is solid. The residency agreement isn't legally binding. From a legal standpoint, Chloe, you don't even owe them an explanation. It's your house and you have every right to reclaim it. She paused, looking at me with a measured seriousness. Miss Collins, are you sure you're ready? I nodded. Yes, I am. After leaving her office, I stopped by a small cafe on the corner. Ordered myself a coffee. Sat by the window for 10 minutes and breathed, for what felt like the first time in years. This was what space felt like. My space. My life. My rules. Back home I didn't say a word. That afternoon, I called the property management office to schedule a vacancy inspection. I booked a moving company. Everything was set. That evening I told Jude in a quiet, matter-of-fact tone. You have 48 hours. He didn't reply. Just let out a long, heavy sigh. From the other room I heard Lydia slamming drawers. Juliana packed while muttering curses under her breath. I ignored them all. And then on the third morning they finally left. The movers loaded their boxes and bags into a truck. Lydia turned at the doorway, face full of fury. You'll regret this, she spat. I smiled, steady and serene. No. I only regret letting it go on for so long. The door slammed shut behind them. Silence settled like snow. I wheeled my old leather suitcase to the balcony. Sunlight spilled over my hands. I pulled out my phone and called Judy. I'm ready to take the one bedroom, I said. Sure you want that one? She teased. It's not close to the subway. No dishwasher. If no one's blasting a vacuum outside my bedroom door, I'll survive just fine. That afternoon I signed the lease and paid the deposit. The day I officially moved in, I listed the house for rent. The rental payments would go directly into my retirement account. No shared keys. No shared air. I went online and ordered new sheets, fresh curtains, and a vintage record player I'd had my eye on for years. 3 days later I moved into my little apartment. It wasn't big, just over 300 square feet. 1 bedroom, 1 bath, a modest kitchen and a living area. But the windows faced south and by late afternoon, sunlight flooded the entire wall. I spent the whole afternoon unpacking and decorating. Cream-colored curtains, my favorite pale green sheets, and that retro turntable, now perched on the corner coffee table beside a small bouquet of daisies. I didn't ask anyone to help. I took my time, 1 box, 1 wipe, 1 drawer at a time, like I was dusting off every last bit of resentment, exhaustion and pain. That night I made a cup of tea. I sat in the rocking chair by the window. The record player spun and Sam Cooke's "A Change Is Gonna Come" filled the room. The sound was warm, grounded, like a hymn for the reborn. I glanced at my phone. A message from the realtor blinked on the screen. Mrs. Collins, your property has been rented. The first payment has been deposited. Please confirm. I smiled. That house. Once I thought it was the container for all the love I'd poured into being a mother. Now I know. What's mine was never that balcony, never the bricks, never the title deed. And certainly not the son who used the word family as a cover for entitlement. What's mine is this room. This record. This quiet, solid woman who finally owns her life again. I whispered. This time my life belongs to me. Outside dusk was falling. The wind rustled the curtains, cool but just right,